Back in 2016, around 10 years ago now, I started making videos around the theory that homosexuality is caused by trauma. And as new evidence has arisen over the years, it's a subject that I've come back to every now and then. And always the message has been the same.
It is normally caused by psychological scarring and emotional trauma in those early developmental years before puberty. Homosexuality is caused by psychological scarring and emotional trauma in developmental years.
That homosexuality is caused by psychological scarring and emotional trauma, particularly in developmental years. That homosexuality can be caused by emotional trauma and psychological scarring, particularly in developmental years.
Now, to test the theory, in 2017, I picked 10 gay celebrities at random and then did some research to see if there were any obvious roots of trauma that would explain subsequent sexual confusion in adulthood and confirm the trauma theory. Now, what I discovered was that 9 out of the 10 randomly chosen celebrities fitted the hypothesis. Rosie O'Donnell was sexually attacked by her father as a child. Ellen DeGeneres was sexually attacked by her stepfather as a child. Elton John's father abandoned him as a child. Ricky Martin was sexually abused by his band manager as a child. Tom Daley's father died aged 40, and then Tom immediately started dating a 40-year-old man. George Takei was molested as a child at a summer camp. Milo Yiannopoulos was molested too as a child. For almost every gay celebrity that I could find, I discovered an obvious root of trauma. I also came across a lot of academic research that confirmed this theory as well. And since those first videos, one of the candidates, Milo Yiannopoulos, has confirmed that he believes his homosexual feelings were a result of trauma. That was a key moment in this timeline.
Homosexuality, in large part, is a cluster of symptoms to early childhood trauma.
Milo is just one of a number of ex-gay people who recognize their sexual confusion was caused by trauma. Jackie Hill Perry is another well-known example. And I've just found many stories and testimonies online over the years of people saying exactly the same thing, that they now recognize that their homosexuality was caused by trauma. Some ex-gay people have written to me directly over the years as well to affirm this. Now, it's time to move the timeline forward again, because I recently came across this interview on a podcast called Heretics recently. You may have heard of it. It's with a psychotherapist called Dr. Az Hakim. And to lay the foundation, Hakim worked at the Portman Clinic in London for 12 years, which is a centre for helping people with disturbing sexual behaviours. In Hakim's own words,
the Portman Clinic was basically a sexual perversion clinic. It still is.
Within the Portman Clinic, there are various departments for every niche of sexual perversion, where each gets studied and analysed. Again, in Hakim's own words,
we all had a different niche. Someone had specialised in paedophiles, someone specialised in fetishists, and incest, and my specialty was gender dysphoria.
Now, even though Hakim himself specialised on gender dysphoria, in this section of the podcast, he keeps affirming that in his 12 years of experience at the Portman Clinic, studying every type of sexual perversion, every single one of them that they came across was rooted in trauma. Every single sexual perversion they came across was rooted in trauma. Now, this clip isn't for the faint-hearted, but I do think it's important that we hear what he's saying here.
So I set up a service, which I ran for 12 years until I left. And it was a psychotherapy only service. So there was it was not attached to any gender clinic. So what I wasn't was a gatekeeper. I wasn't someone to say, oh yes, you can go and have this, you can't have that. So people could be completely honest. And it was basically a neutral exploratory space for adults who came saying that there was something wrong with their sex or gender. And that 12 years really informed my understanding of what it was.
Okay. And I suppose the next question then is, what is it?
Well, and if you think about the term trans, is a really unhelpful term. It's an umbrella term. So you've got people that used to be called transsexuals who believe that they should be the opposite sex. There are a small amount of them. Then a huge amount of what we used to call transvestites. Nobody talks about transvestites anymore. So the majority of people who we refer to as trans are transvestites. And they were either people who were fetishistic, so they cross-dressed and got sexually excited and would masturbate, or people who weren't overly sexually excited but were afforded some sort of advantage, like they felt more confident, or they, those are the transvestites. And a very small proportion were what we call autogynephiles, or AGPs, which a lot of people in the gender critical group confuse with fetishist transvestites. They think that every man who's obviously a fetishist transvestite is an AGP, but they're not. Autogynephilia is men who have this sexual fantasy of having female bodily parts.
Okay, as opposed to fetish transvestites who have get arousal from the wearing the clothes.
So the transvestite is you know that you're the sex you are, but you get something out of putting on the external vestiges of the opposite sex. And analytically, there was a paper written years ago where they described the young boy who has a smothering, overpowering mother from whom he feels claustrophobic from.
Pink Floyd, The Wall. That's what that was about.
Was it?
Yes.
He wasn't a transvestite though, was he?
He was weird. And Roger Waters, it was all about mother, all his songs about his mum. And he has gone a bit weird.
Had long hair.
Yeah.
But so the boy with the smothering, overpowering mother, claustrophobic, then gets power over his mother by putting his mother on and taking his mother off at will. And there's that. So with perversion, with sexual perversions, there's always a root of trauma. And with trauma, you have a number of outcomes. Either nothing, or you get a bit upset and get over it, or you get something along the PTSD spectrum with nightmares and flashbacks, or very rarely you sexualize it. And by sexualizing it, you get dominance and power over what would otherwise traumatize you. There's no choice. You don't say, well, what am I going to do? It just happens. So everyone we saw, because the Portland clinic was basically a sexual perversion clinic. It still is. For every perversion, we saw a trauma at the root of it. So the putting your mother on and off again is why a lot of transvestites look like Hyacinth Bouquet, because that's what their mothers look like. I had one fetishist transvestite that would, his boyfriend would put him into a latex chamber with a vacuum attached to it. So it would, like one of those Tetra Pak, like those mackerel in Marks and Spencer's.
I think I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Like you're like that. Okay.
Yeah. And once he got to that stage and asphyxiating, then he would orgasm. So he was dressed up in a vacuum chamber in order to get orgasm. And if you took a history from him, as I did, when he was 10, he walked into the kitchen and found his mother dead with her head in the oven. So he had converted the trauma of the suffocating dead mother into putting his mother on and suffocating. And that was he didn't make the link.
Wow.
But there was such an obvious link. So with the fetishist, there's always a trauma. And the wonderful book by Dennis Nielsen, is it Story of a Drowning Boy? His autobiography that he wrote in high security prison before he died, and they didn't want to release it. But that's a wonderful description of how he came to end up collecting men to kill and then to keep and looking at them, because his original trauma was when he was taken to see his dead grandfather or uncle in state, lying in state after he died, and that traumatized him. And then when he was an adult, he picked up a man and he was lying in bed and he wanted that moment to last forever. So he killed him just so he could look at him, because that was his trauma. And that became sexualized into his necrophilia.
He said it several times there. In his experience of 12 years studying sexual perversions of all kinds, they discovered there is always a root of trauma. And when he talks about people sexualizing their trauma as a means of trying to gain a sense of power and control over what happened to them, that is also something that we've been discussing on this channel going right back to 2016. That has been a part of the trauma theory hypothesis that I've been putting forward all of these years, that people are sexualizing their trauma as a way of trying to gain some sort of power and control over what happened to them, normally when they were a child in developmental years. In fact, what Hakeem said there reminded me of this quote by Joseph Sayambra, which I first mentioned on my very first video on this topic in 2016. Sayambra is an ex-homosexual, and he said, Generally, gay men enter the lifestyle in their late teens or early 20s. At that age, there are plenty of opportunities to express oneself and experiment. This newfound power can be heady at first. For instance, you were once the kid that no one wanted on their team, or the boy with the overly critical and unloving father, or the scared child that somebody touched. Suddenly, you are with people who have largely gone through the same thing, though almost never admitting it. Instead, everyone plays out the trauma of youth in a bizarre ceremony of reenactment as healing. Now you can dance into the throng, feel their warm bodies next to you, and imagine that you're finally part of the group. Older men who want you to call them daddy ask you out, and that moment of shame and embarrassment from your childhood doesn't seem strange or horrifying anymore, because you can live it over again and draw pleasure from it under what you think are your own terms. So this is exactly what Dr. Azakim was just talking about in that podcast there. Although I observed a genuine affection between gay men, it was akin to the instant camaraderie which indelibly links all horror survivors. For this was the characteristic that I witnessed in every same-sex couple, a bond of suffering enkindled by their shared memories of a childhood gone wrong, failed parents, tales of bullied boys, and lonely nights spent crying out for love. I think the evidence is really stacking up here over the years. Ever since I first made that video over these past 10 years, the evidence has really been accumulating that sexual perversion, of which homosexuality is one facet or one expression, is indeed rooted in trauma. And when someone expresses unnatural sexual desires or any kind of fetish really, it's pointing to an inner brokenness in that person. It's telling us that something has gone wrong within that person. Now, when we understand the trauma theory, it should inform how we approach this whole subject, and it should change for many of us how we approach this whole subject. If someone goes into hospital with a physical trauma, like say a broken leg, the doctor is clearly not helping that person if he affirms that brokenness. If he says something like, I just want to affirm you as a broken-legged person. That's just who you are. You're a broken-legged person. Don't let anyone tell you that having a broken leg is a bad thing. In fact, if anyone has a problem with your broken leg, they're a fascist and a Nazi. I'll tell you what we actually need is a broken leg pride parade where everyone marches down the high street waving banners in support of your broken leg. I'm a broken-legged ally is what I am. Does that help the person to have his brokenness affirmed? No. He doesn't need his broken leg affirmed. He needs it to be healed. And it's the same thing when people present sexual brokenness. They don't need it to be affirmed. They need it to be healed. They need someone to help them get to the root of their trauma and then work through it so they can find healing and wholeness once again. There are many ex-gay people out there who are trying to explain this to the world, that they once had these feelings. The root trauma was then dealt with. Oftentimes it's because they met Jesus, and afterwards the feelings completely disappeared. There's so many people trying to tell their story, but so many people don't want to listen right now because it runs contrary to the current progressive postmodern narrative that so many people believe in. But this is the way. This is how we deal with homosexuality and transgenderism and whatever it may be. Not by affirming it, but by healing it, getting to the root of the trauma and healing it. It's been especially frustrating to see some Christians in recent years even starting to bend to the world on this issue, affirming brokenness. Really, there's no excuse for Christians to have ever wavered on this topic because the Bible has always been very clear that homosexuality and all forms of sexual perversion are against God's design. As usual, the evidence from science is beginning to support it, but there has never been any excuse for Christians to have ever wavered on this. The Bible is so clear. Trust God's word at all times and with all things. Stop bending to the mob. Stop conforming to the world and start speaking the plain biblical truth. Start trusting God's word at all times. Homosexuality is brokenness. Transgenderism is brokenness. The truly loving thing is to say these things so that they can be healed. Just one final thing before I finish this video. Last week, I made a video where I said that the liberal, postmodern, progressive, woke era seems to be ending, and what comes next has to be rooted in the Bible if it's going to succeed. No conservative counter movement or revolution is going to succeed without it being centered on Jesus. The reason I say this is because I keep seeing secular conservative voices who are trying to shape the future. And in many ways, they're very wise and I respect their work, but they are affirming homosexuality. Maybe it's because some of the frontline conservatives like Douglas Murray, Dave Rubin, Andrew Doyle, etc. are gay themselves. That probably explains the blind spot and why nobody within that movement wants to call this out. But as much as I respect their efforts in so many other ways, and they're so wise in so many ways, we have to acknowledge the inherent brokenness in homosexuality if we're to fix the current sexual confusion which is so rife in the world and in the West. What I often see at the moment is secular conservative voices trying to roll back the trans part of sexual confusion, the QTI plus part, but refusing to see that homosexuality is part of the same problem. You sometimes see conservatives saying that the LGB part is fine, but it's just all those other letters that are all the crazies. There's an attempt to sort of divide this into two and say this part is fine and that part is where all the crazies live. But no, this is all part of the same problem. It is all sexual confusion caused by trauma and brokenness. It is all unnatural. You sometimes see some conservative voices saying that trans kids aren't really trans. They're just gay kids that were pushed down the wrong path, as though we're meant to say, oh yeah, gay kids, that's perfectly normal. That's perfectly fine. There's no such thing as gay kids either. There is no gay gene. There is no gay brain. There is no scientific evidence that anyone is born gay. In fact, I might do my next video on that topic. What we do know is that there's a staggering amount of evidence that homosexuality, just like all forms of sexual perversion, is rooted in trauma and brokenness. We need to start speaking this truth so that people can find healing. We need to stop affirming this. And this is just one reason why I say that the counter movement, whatever the revolution, the cultural change, whatever comes next, it will not work unless it's rooted in Jesus Christ and in the Bible, because it's only in Jesus Christ and it's only in God's word that you get the whole truth that we so desperately need right now.